Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
My name is Lori.
My name is Lori.
I'm Chief Global
I'm Chief
Content
Global
Officer
Content
for Learn It,
Officer for Learn It.
and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual event. Our mission at Learn It is simple. We exist to support the meaningful conversations that education leaders want and need to have to make change happen. We do this through our in-person event, which will be held next, January 19th through 21st, 2021 in London. And we do it through virtual events like this one. We hope for those of you that have been joining us that you've been enjoying this virtual format as much as we are. It's allowed us to support timely conversations in the moment, which is key during a period characterized by so much change. We've had great interest in today's session on reopening schools safely, and our excellent panel of global education leaders spans early years through secondary school. We have Yvonne Smiley, Deputy Chief Academic Officer for Busy Bees Nursery Group, Yael Biber Aviad, Principal of the Alonim School, an innovative public primary school in Israel, Conrad Hughes, a secondary principal at the International School of Geneva, and Neelam Parmar, an educational technologist from United Learning Trust, the largest MAT in the UK. We're going to start the conversation on reopening schools today, but we know that this is an ongoing story and one we may want to return to. Just a few notes on our format today. We'll have 45 minutes of moderated discussion focused on how these leaders and their schools have been, or will be, managing the process of reopening their settings and schools. One of the topics we'll touch upon early is logistical measures our leaders have put in place to keep their settings safe. In order to keep the discussion focused, we asked our speakers to share an overview of these measures in advance, and these are available for you to access at any point during our session from the handouts toolbar on the right-hand side. They can be viewed directly or downloaded. After 45 minutes, we'll open up the floor to questions from our audience for the last 15. And you'll have a chance to submit questions or upvote those that you find particularly relevant. And with that, I'll turn you over to the very safe hands of our moderator, Jenny Anderson, to start our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. I want to dive right in. We're not going to waste any time. I think this question of how to open schools safely is on everybody's mind right now. And it's useful, I think, in this setting to hear from those who have done it and are a little bit ahead, sort of tales from the future, and those of you who are right on the brink of doing it. And I think we want to focus. I'm going to start with you, Yael, so I'm going to dive right in. Your school is a project-based learning school. It's based on a high-tech, high-type model, which seems to lend itself to a lot of interaction. So I think I'd love to go straight to you and ask you, and it's a primary school, I should say that it's the state primary school that has this project-based learning model. Right now, you've been open for about a month already, so you've got some real learnings underway. Why don't we focus on the social distancing and the face masks, if I could, with you? What are kids having to do? What are teachers having to do? And what has that experience been like?
The first graders are the only that are free of face mask. From the second grade, they have to put on the face mask everywhere but in the classroom. And from the fourth grade, they must put the face mask at all times, which is including the classroom, which is almost impossible. They have to keep a social distance of 2 meters at any time. We struggle a lot about it. They have the breaks separately. Each class have a different area, in a different zone and a different time. We keep on talking with them about it, but they tend to forget it very, very quickly because, they're kids.
And has that proven to be the most challenging aspect of this opening? Is it the social distancing and the face masks?
I think it's the regulations. Like, I was asking my students in the first and second and third grade, I told them about this conference and I asked them for tips. And I thought they will talk about ideas about the nice games they invented. But they said, okay, tell them they have to keep 2 meters, tell them they have to wash their hands, etc., etc. They're like brainwashed so many regulations. So this is the challenge. We are a progressive school, and we just use the word don't and no all the time. It's against everything we believe in education.
And let me just ask one last question before I move on to Neelam, but are you able to do the kinds of projects that your school is sort of built to do with these regulations in place? Or are you having to really alter everything about the school in light of this?
We didn't even try. And this is the first tip I can give to educators and school leaders. We have to put aside our expectations, our time schedule in terms of the end of the year and evaluation, everything else. I think we need to give ourselves the time and the space to reconnect one with each other, to understand from the beginning what is school in this situation, what is class, what are the relations, what we can do, instead of thinking of all the things we cannot do and being frustrated from trying to work in this impossible situation. We have to reinvent school. The physical school needs to be reinvented in this situation for this time period. So yeah. Projects are not the first thing I would deal with.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that. Neelam, I'd love to go to you if I could. So I just want to tell you all a little bit about Neelam. She's the Director of Educational Technology and Digital Learning and Innovation at the Ashford School, which is part of the United Learning Trust, but she also oversees EdTech for all 90 of those. So that's a fairly significant remit. And there are independent and state schools involved in this. So what I would love to start with is, when you look at the list of things you need to do, the logistics that need to be put in place to open on Monday, right around the corner, what has been the most challenging aspect, and what are you kind of most nervous about right now?
Okay, so just to clarify, I work as Director of EdTech at Ashford School, and I'm part of the Educational Technologist group at United Learning Trust. So I tend to support mainly the independent sector with some state and academy schools attached within it. But I can speak, if you want to look at details, I can speak from an Ashford School point of view in terms of how we're looking to open. So obviously we're looking to open reception year 1 and year 6. And we have what we call our own bubbles, which is a common term phrase used now, keeping our numbers down to under 15 and under, which we can successfully do because obviously we have smaller class groups. But yeah, Yael said, we thought we had problems in lockdown. It sounds like we're going to have a few more coming up ahead of us. And perhaps even though we've sort of prepared for what we think is the ideal situation moving forward, who knows what's going to come out when we actually go into school. Yes, we've tried to adhere to the guidelines as best as we can, offering that 2 meter social distancing in classrooms. We've offered we've put together a one-way street, so students come in one way, exit the other way. We have large grounds, so we're quite fortunate in that sense that when it comes to playtime, we can segment them in different ways. But again, what schools do within the group is going to vary across the board. And I can only speak from Ashford School from a detailed point of view, but of course, all the other schools will try to follow these guidelines and take it into consideration and planning our entrance back into school on Monday.
Right. And just maybe go through a couple of the very basic logistics, just so everybody on here can get a sense. No parents in school, is that right?
It's a staggered drop off. We'll have the little ones come in a slightly earlier, 8 o'clock, and then there's a staggered 15 minutes before the next lot come through. No parents on board, only the teachers, as we would have in school. We would have hand sanitizers at entrance, and then have all the antibacterial wipes required as well in the classroom. We keep their children within the bubbles and their teacher in the classroom. Again, we've set it up so that the desks are spaced apart. They'll sit at their desks, and then the teacher will be in front. It's going to be slightly more challenging, of course, with the younger years, reception in year 1, because they obviously are more into movement and will want to, like Yael was saying, we almost have to, they're going to be telling us what's acceptable and not to some point, and we've got to keep reiterating, you must be sitting down, you must not go to somebody else's desk. But again, the fact that we're in our bubbles and moving around, to some degree offers a protection of a protective layer or safety in some sense. That we'll have to see when we come back from there. But yeah, in a similar format, year 6 will come in with their own resources, their own books, their own materials, leave them in school at their desk, and will not be sharing sort of resources with other students. That we're going to hopefully get them equipped so that they come in with everything they need. Perhaps not so much with the earlier years, but again, we'll try to keep it as separate as we can. So those are the sort of measures that's in place. Lunchtime, break time, segment them as we see fit. The interesting thing is the teaching, and how we're going to use the tech, and then how we're sort of going to blend environments with those students that are home because they cannot come to school, and then how we're going to carry on the teaching in the classroom.
I think you started by saying this, but we thought we had a logistical nightmare with trying to move everything online, and obviously coming back is like just a new chapter. Now it's sort of the blended chapter, trying to meet a lot of different needs. But I do think we should come back to that. I want to stay on the logistics just a little bit longer because I think I'd love to give Conrad. Is Conrad on now? Have we gotten him? No, we're still missing Conrad. Okay, do we have Yvonne? I'm not seeing her on my screen.
No, I'm afraid that we're having a bit of technical difficulty with both Yvonne and Conrad.
That's fine. I mean, I think why don't we, for now, I'll wait until they appear and we can go back to them on that. But Yael, talk to me a little bit about how your teaching and learning has changed. You mentioned some games that the kids have come up with. So it sounds to me like perhaps the kids are taking some charge here. How is the teaching and learning changing, and how are the kids changing? How are you seeing the kids change?
I think for the first thing, when the students came back, I was worried, how come we will tell them all these restrictions? No way they will obey. But what we found out is the students came back very different from the way they left. Israel is very, very informal culture. Students feel very, very comfortable. There's no distance. But because what they've been through, so during the time of the lockdown, so they were very ready to have other rules and restrictions, and we had to go through a long way of like getting to let them feel comfortable again in this situation. So it was so we started with giving. We have a common. All the materials are common, like pencils and erasers and stuff. And we realized we have to divide them and give each one his own personal stuff, equipment. And then we hardly can do any groups work. But I did it, like I said, just turn around and talk with the other person from the other table, you know. And in the beginning, I wanted to just, okay, so I said, I'll just deliver the papers between them. But then I said, okay, I cannot do that. So I asked them to post it on the wall. And then I asked them to turn around, looking at other post-its. So really the creativity of us have to be in every single point. Then when they went out for the break, they're not allowed to play with the ball. So we asked them to bring their personal toys. We spend all the time to teach them how to share their stuff. And then we say, don't share. So we started to give each other ideas about toys that you can play together without sharing, like cards and stuff. There's this game, a children game of chasing each other, but
tag or it,
yeah, but are not allowed to touch each other. So they did a shadow catch. So if I'm standing on your shadow, I caught you, I chased you. That kind of stuff. They discovered corners in the yard that they've never had any attention to. Like we have this garden that there's no gardener, so it's just like there. Then they started digging. So they found all these creative ways of new games, and we let them share it. This is very important because they are going through such a deep and confusing emotional process. It's so important to let them talk about it and reprocess it in the whole time.
Yeah, I want to come back to that idea of maybe focusing on well-being more than sort of the cognitive academic stuff, because kind of have to figure out where these kids are. It's a fascinating point you just made, Conrad. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Yael just said that she found that the students came back completely different, which is not surprising, but also kind of moving to hear. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the logistics of your reopening. You've also been open for a little while. I just want to tell our listeners a tiny bit about you. Conrad Hughes is the campus and secondary principal at the International School of Geneva. He also teaches philosophy and is a research assistant at the University of Geneva in the departments of psychology and education. And he has written books on prejudice in education, 7 global challenges of education. And you have one coming out on education and elitism, a topic very near and dear to my heart. I can't wait to read that one. Talk to us a little bit about coming back. And we're focusing on logistics now, and we'll get to the sort of more philosophical and the teaching and the learning later. But what were the biggest challenges to coming back? And maybe tell us a little bit about sort of your social distancing practices. You've got no face masks, as I understand it. So this is really about how you keep your students safe and moving around. What does that look like, and what's working and what's not?
Okay. Well, the first thing is that everything we do is scripted by Swiss law, which is quite complex because you've got the Confederation of Switzerland, which issues national guidelines. And then those are conjugated by cantonal guidelines. So we've got the Canton of Geneva that a few days after the national announcement will give us, will stipulate what the guidelines are for schools in the region. And we followed those scrupulously. We decided, at the outset of this pandemic to use one reference point for the sake of coherence. I mean, that in itself is an issue, who you're going to go with. And I think a lot of confusion has been created by this pandemic because there are multiple sources of information. But we took a stance as a school to follow, obviously, national guidelines because we have to, but not to look for other sources of information and directives. The return to school has been staggered. Now, the way it works in Switzerland is that young children from kindergarten all the way up to the equivalent of what for us is year 10, which would be grade 9 for US schools. They've been coming back on a rotation. So half of the students are in at any given point. And the way we did it was we split the whole school population in half alphabetically. We took their surnames, and names that ran from A to K would be one group and L to Z the other. And we've had each of those groups rotating in on alternative days. So Monday would be group A, Tuesday would be group B. Why did we do this? Well, because we need lower numbers to be able to manage all of the health and safety regulations that are so important to respect. You commented on face masks. The Swiss position on face masks is that you need to wear them if you are going to enter into the 2-meter distancing zone. We call it physical distancing, not social distancing. I don't like the term social distancing. So we've got quite a few of our people wearing face masks, but the golden rule that actually is more important is to respect the distancing and not to encourage people to get too close to one another because they got masks. A curious thing about the Swiss approach has been that young people, and that's really up to the age of 15, aren't seen as vectors. So physical distancing protocols for young people are not enforced. The golden rule is that adults have to keep away from one another and away from children. There were also very strict guidelines on certain materials that we weren't allowed to manipulate, balls, rackets, all sorts of activities that might involve the sharing of equipment. We stopped science experiments. We stopped any kind of sharing of equipment. We've kept adults off the campus. All meetings are virtual. This is meetings with adults. And we have staggered break times, staggered lunch times. We have spaces that are specifically for a year level so that we can do contact tracing in the advent of there being any kind of, positive testing of coronavirus. And we've got very strict protocols as well on what you should do if if there's symptoms that are revealed. So as soon as a student or a member of the faculty or anyone in the community presents symptoms, they need to follow a number of guidelines, which involve self-quarantining for 10 days plus 48 hours after the disappearing of those symptoms, or if there's a positive test, there's a slightly different protocol. You have to quarantine siblings. And this has meant that we've had to do quite a lot of tracking to make sure that our information is up to date. So I guess to sort of sum all of the logistics up, it's really about following national and cantonal guidelines and trying to create simplicity out of complexity. And so the golden rules are really, hand washing and physical distancing, not for the sake of doing it, but because you need to conceptualize and understand that this is a dangerous and highly infectious virus, and that it will linger on your hands if you don't wash your hands. It's there, it could be there. And that when you start getting close to people within that 2 meter proximity, then you're putting yourself at risk. I suppose that the slightly more radical approach that the Swiss have taken, and that this came from Daniel Koch, who is the official advisor to the federal authorities on health and safety, is this idea that children aren't actually vectors. Statistically, the numbers are so low that the idea was that we don't need to enforce physical distancing between younger students. Now, on the 8th of June, our older students start to come back. And we are pretty sure that we're going to have to enforce distancing with the older students. That's going to present a significant logistical challenge, and we're not there yet.
Right. I can see Yael sort of nodding her head furiously. Amazing that we have such completely different protocols, right, in two countries where, we would love to, I think if there's one reigning sentiment right now, there's clearly anxiety, but there's also just so much confusion. There's so much variety, there's so much variability in what's out there. I want to dive into sort of the kinds of learning, the hybrid learning that we have, but I want to actually ask Neelam and Yael and Conrad whether you have questions for each other, because I actually think maybe right now in this moment you might have some interesting, and if you don't, I'm happy to continue going. But Yael, I sort of saw you furiously nodding a couple times. Same with Neelam. Anything you want to ask each other right now?
I want to ask my government to meet with some other governments, and no, because I feel that restrictions about physical distance for young kids are something so complicated, and I think the cost, the emotional costs that those kids will pay for having so many restrictions have to be more considered with the chance that they will have the virus, they'll be sick. So I think the idea to differentiate between adults and children, to differentiate the regulations, I think it's a very good idea. So I wish we in Israel will adopt this kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think we'd all like a word with our governments, but we'll leave that conversation for another day. Neelam, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Very similar to both of them. We also are following guidelines provided by the government. Hand washing is so important, making sure everything is clean and keeping that social distance. But, I am very conscious that those schools that have been able to continue connecting with their students, I wonder, it's actually just a small comment here. I wonder what the relationship will be like when these children come into school versus those students who've had absolutely no contact for 8 weeks. And then will it be like they're working with strangers, as Yael has indicated that they've come back bewildered with all these constraints and conditions on them. And so I think that we'll only know when we start next week,
Right.
because we're just behind Conrad and Yael. And it's really insightful to hear what they're saying here, because it's things we can watch out for.
Well, so that's a perfect segue to the next bit, which is really the first thing Conrad and Yael you focused on, and Neelam, I think this is, as I understand it, something you plan to focus on, but this idea of putting well-being first, right? Seeing where these kids are, seeing what's happened to them, and then connecting with them. What have you actually done that's worked or not worked? Honestly, throw it all out there.
Okay, so
to
what
try
we
to
did
connect with your students when they come back on well-being.
we were talking in the first days, we asked them to talk about the differences between the school they used to know and what they found out now, as a way of processing the changes. And then we asked them to talk about what did not change, which is just as much important. We let them process what they've been going through in so many ways, again and again and again. Writing stories, drawings, telling one each other. We return to things we used to do when we did the distance learning, and we did the same thing in class. So they had something to lean on, something familiar. It made the connection between the distance and the physical learning, the hybrid thing in their minds. We went through the norms, the school norms, with the new norms, the old and important school norms, because we had to restructure them, because some children forgot everything about day and night. They still come sometimes and sleep on the tables because their parents are struggling to put them back in track. And from the other hand, to make them understand that the new regulations are combined with the familiar regulations. A lot of we try more than ever to combine the core curriculum with social and emotional learning, to give them a lot of chances to expose themselves. And one more thing that is always good, I think, but now more than ever, is to use art to let them express themselves in so many ways. And I think I want to say that this is when I told my educators that they can lean on from all the academic goals they had before. It's not that I meant that they will forget everything about it for the rest, but I wanted to say that now it's not the most important thing, and that gave them the freedom to reinvent kind of activities that they will enable to the students to create more and express themselves more.
Right. You sort of gave them the freedom to put that well-being first, which then enabled them to kind of explore some other channels. Conrad, did you find students came back much different, and how did you focus on their well-being, and where did well-being fit with academics? I mean, everyone's worried about, losing ground and attainment, but there's this massive anxiety issue right there in the middle of it. So what have you done?
Okay, well, the three essential points I'd say around learning remotely in a time of pandemic. And let's not forget that the two go together here. Online learning presents certain challenges all by itself, but when you're living through a global pandemic, there's a macro level of anxiety that you need to consider. And what that led us to was essentially, first of all, and this was an important decision to take, to keep learning synchronous. All the research on online learning advocates for asynchronous learning. It's better for the ecology of learning, for students to use their own time differently, because that's one of the affordances that you get when you are learning remotely. You don't have to follow a time-stamped curriculum. It starts at 8:15 in the morning, for example. However, when you do that, you're losing a sense of ritual, a sense of continuity, and a contact that is ongoing with the community. And so we decided to keep the timetable intact. And that proved to be very important because it meant that students were not checking in once a week or getting work that was posted, but every day they had that ongoing contact. That was important. Now that leads me to the second point, which is you can't carry on as if it's business as usual. So we reduced the amount of time online. Online learning is exhausting for the teachers and the students. So we took 45-minute periods and took them down to 30 minutes and a double period of 90 minutes down to 60 minutes. We stressed the importance of teachers doing mindfulness exercises with the students, using that extra time to do one-on-one check-ins, letting the students actually asking the students to go out for a quick walk or to take a few breaths of air outside. And not to feel guilty about this sort of curriculum coverage craze that has infected education, particularly in the secondary school where stakes are high. And to say, listen, you can modify your outcomes. What's important here is that learning is effective. And for that to happen, you're going to have to size down the amount of contact time that you've got online. So that was an important decision that was appreciated. Then something that we also insisted on was cameras need to be on.
You know what, Conrad, I think
when the teacher and the students congregate, all the cameras come on. We have a grid view. We use Google Meet. Have a little wave. Everybody sees each other. There's a little bit of contact checking in. And then we can go on to the lesson, which might be offline, which might have the cameras off. But that ritual is incredibly important. If you don't push students to do it, some of them leave their cameras off all the time, and you don't actually know what's going on. And they don't get to see each other. So I think those 3 points were important through our online journey. To keep a synchronous timetable, but to reduce contact time for the purposes of mindfulness, and to have those sort of, camera on check-in moments. Then I think I'd add 2 others that have been important, not only during remote learning, but coming back in. And, like so much else in this crisis, these are questions of good teaching and learning, good pedagogy that have been augmented, that have been amplified. They're not new. The first is to keep calm and to communicate serenity, to never project anxiety. Even unconsciously, what that does is it really hampers learning and it can shut students down. And, I saw a lot of our teachers, they were panicking. And so we really emphasized how important it was for us to consciously, deliberately communicate good energy and to keep people calm and focused. It sounds pretty obvious, but if you don't emphasize it, one can forget and start to transmit panic and anxiety. So that was the first thing. And that makes us think a bit more deeply about the principle of really establishing good relationships and calmness and wellness for learning to take place anyway. And the second was this idea of just keeping instructions clear, keeping them simple. There's an infodemic of information. Unpacking, discussing, that needs to take place. But it's very important not to drown young people in the wild west of the web that has become COVID-19 obsessed, and to actually draw them to simple learning objectives. So, learning objectives online should be shorter. They should be clearly articulated. And we really put an emphasis on this to make sure that we weren't adding to the stress by giving too much work, too much homework, complicated assignments,
right.
And we had to get past the feeling of guilt and fear that by doing less, we'd be somehow shortchanging the students. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Here's a case where if you do less well, you're doing much more better. And that in itself, I think, it has made us all think about what we're trying to do, certainly in a secondary school environment, where the curriculum is crowded garage, and you're trying to chase through everything, and the stakes are too high, and students are stressed, and actually can clamp down on a lot of thinking. So, simplify, calm down, get to the essential, keep it positive.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of those. Maybe that'll be one of the. I certainly hear from a lot of educators that they're hoping that less can be more, but whether that actually happens once we get back to more of a normal. Neelam, I really want to. Conrad just raised a bunch of points about technology, and I'd love to get your view as a educational technologist. This is your area of expertise. What did we learn in lockdown that we're going to carry? That you're going to try? I should say. I know this is coming. It's right in front of us. What are you going to try to carry forward, and what are you going to ditch? Like what, there's some things we can say, finally, we're in the classroom, let's let it all go as best we can. And then there's some things we want to embrace, right? And push forward. This is a moment. What are you seeing on that front? How does teaching and learning change via technology with the backdrop of the pandemic and the backdrop that students have a lot of anxiety right now? But this is a moment.
So, for those schools that have been established as quite technology-rich schools and that have been providing a online learning environment for their students already, because we have, again, having a staggered approach where we're just going to introduce a few year groups back into school, and then eventually June 15th onwards, years 10 and 12, we have subject specialist teachers who are not all going to come into school to be there with the students. They still have to carry on teaching in other year groups. So with that context on board, those schools that actually have started teaching online already will continue to teach in that online environment. So actually, speaking with Laurie, funny enough, I use the word virtual and online very interchangeably. But the truth is, as I thought about it more, our students, some of them will get traditional face-to-face classroom teaching, so the younger years that come into school. But then those that require subject specialist teaching, so some in year 6, some in year 10, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc., their teachers may not be on board, so they will continue to pre-record their lessons or teach live lessons, which I'll come to in a minute, as they've done in the past and which has worked really well for us. So in that sense, the students are learning in an online manner. But what's interesting is those teachers are not in school. They'll be in their home environment. So it kind of almost becomes virtual. So we have not only a blended approach, or traditional classroom teaching, and then blended approach, but then we have this online and virtual teaching at the same time, all happening in this new space. Now, is this what they call new norm? I don't know. Who knows? I do know it's a developing norm, and it's something that's will soon come into being in the next few weeks, and we'll see how it takes shape. It's going to be a very organic sort of development. But just coming back to what Conrad was saying about lessons, when you're working with the younger years, and then some years 7, 8, and 9, for instance, those that are in our online environments, find that pre-recorded lessons, asynchronous ones, are helpful, yes, particularly if you've got children who are boarders who come from different countries, and you can have the lessons for them. But those, not all students are highly academic or have high ability. There are some who are mixed ability, some in the lower ability spectrum. And we found it's easier to conduct live lessons, although more intense, yes, but it almost resembles a more classroom-like experience to some extent, but you have that live one-to-many session going on. So when I, for instance, am conducting my lessons, and I purposely asked to get back into lessons so I could lead with example, I'm modeling the experience here. I found that, of course, with the students who were highly independent and conscientious, I could offer a task and they would go ahead and do it, and then follow up with extended tasks. And, I would just be in the background. I don't need to support as much. But when you're working with mixed abilities and low ability children, then walking hand in hand with them, supporting them throughout their tasks and their understanding, to my experience and some other teachers, is more effective than just offering a pre-recorded lesson. And for the very reason that, one, they felt isolated. One, they would listen to the recording, not know really what's happening, and to just turn it off and walk away. But two, at the same time, these children needed that emotional sort of support, and that modeling support with them, so that they had a better understanding of what's happening. So from that perspective, it's going to be like a melting pot, I think. What's going to come out of it is going to be interesting, but we're definitely going to have all strands of traditional learning with the younger ones, bringing in subject teachers in an online environment, students learning in that manner with a teacher facilitating that experience in the classroom, and then a real virtual experience for those students who are home, teachers at home, and the students in school, and then just sort of connecting the dots. So you can see what I'm trying to get at.
It's a matrix from hell, basically.
Can I put on
organized
Can
chaos.
I add on to that?
Yes,
I
please.
wanted, what we did is we decided to use Google Classroom from first grade. Now the students on the first and the second grade were not familiar at all with this environment, and that was quite challenging with parents that were not didn't have the time or the patience to sit with the students and to connect them and to show them how to with their children. So I think it's important. We don't know for how long we'll be physically in schools. Many people assume that we'll go back to distance learning in a while. So we understood that it's important to take advantage of the time that the students are physically with us to give them better facilities of working online. And one more thing is that reflection. Like I asked the first graders, how was it to do distance learning? So one of them would say, I understood that I have to do it first thing in the morning because afterwards, if I don't do it first thing in the morning, then I want to play in my games and I don't do it. So this is very important, I think, when we're there, especially with the students coming from a challenging social economical background where parents are not partners to assist the students, children. We have to do it while they are in school and to give them the tools to work independently when they are going back for online study.
Let me ask you. You just hit on something that's very important. It's actually coming up in the Q&A, so I want to make sure I hit it. What has been your experience of parental anxiety, and how have you handled it? Do you have any useful tips to people listening to help manage parents who are nervous about their kids going back? Like, how do you do that? Conrad's leaning forward. He has something to say.
Yeah, I think something that we did well in our school was to create a risk matrix that ran from level 1 to level 4. And we did this in March as the school went remote to indicate exactly where we were and where we might go. And now we're phasing back into the risk matrix, if you like. We're from level 4 down to level 3. So we have a set of standards and behaviors, protocols that one could expect at different levels of that risk matrix. And I think what that did was it brought some degree of certainty in a climate of uncertainty, of great relief to parents.
Okay, that's helpful. Yael, have you found anything?
I think in Israel, the young children, the parents most of them were so eager to go back to work.
Yeah.
Just take the kids,
Make
sure they'll come back.
Okay.
No, I think it was important for them to see that we take very seriously all the regulations, and as we do. There are few parents with children that have all kind of they are in risk groups, so they are still at home. But I think they were so eager to be able to go back to work. So I think in a way they appreciate us more than ever before.
Well, I should hope so after all this. Okay, so we have so many questions, and I really want to give air to as many of them, and some of them are super fast. So what I'd love is if you've got an answer, jump in. And I don't think we need to be comprehensive and go to everybody, but this one is actually a really big one. Teacher well-being. How are you supporting teacher well-being? Conrad, you're saying, everyone needs to exude this serenity and calm. And I'm thinking, oh my God, as a parent, that's what I want to do, but I never actually do it. So how do you help your teachers? How do you support their well-being? Neelam, what are you planning on doing to support teacher well-being? Can you guys jump in on that quickly?
Well, something that we did, I'll be quick here. Something that we did was we ramped up our communication and our availability. So we usually have a staff briefing once a week, and we created a virtual staff room that's open every day. We kept that open during the holidays. And that is just a place to check in if you feel like having a talk, if you're worried about something. The expectation is not that you join that. It's not a faculty meeting. It's just a place for people to hang out if they're feeling a little bit anxious or they want to share something. Another thing we did with the senior leadership team is we had a look at all of our teachers, and we identified the ones that we know are actually living alone. And we set up a buddy system where we would call them, more than once a week. And it's not about work. It's just, hey, how are you doing? And that proved to really be appreciated by teachers. The last thing is we've put in our statements in our campus reopening guide that there's no judgment about teachers who are at risk and therefore are teaching remotely. And it's important for when you've got members of the community who can't be here physically but would like to be here, to never make them feel that there's any judgment about that. So, exactly what those strategies entail, of course, depends on the person and the circumstances. But the spirit is, let's be kind to each other and not make anyone feel bad about their fears over this pandemic. So we've really tried to emphasize that as much as possible. And the mantra with my team was serenity at all costs. It's about the way you communicate, how well you listen, and just being all that more cognizant of any behavior that you might perform that could actually be perceived as judgmental or aggressive when it's not intended that way. It's just the danger when you're in a hurry. You're not actually as mindful about the way you communicate that, and then actually checking in with people more often than usual.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Neelam, what are you thinking? Yael's leaning forward. I'll go to her first.
Okay, two more things I'd like to share. One is give the message, as I said before, that the expectations are not like in a normal, regular times. The other thing is room in staff meetings to share emotions, worries, challenges. I think that understanding that you're not the only one with those kind of feelings is very important.
Right. Isn't it interesting that it's taken this moment for us to kind of get to that point, to make it okay to really get into the emotions of teachers? Neelam, how are you preparing for this?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because, when you say the expectations are not high, I'm just thinking that for those schools who have done a brilliant job online, our expectations are high because we've done such a good job online. We've given the education, the teachers are on board. If anything, I was very worried about our teachers when we went into lockdown, when they had to start delivering in that intensive week of shock and then following through Easter. And that's probably when well-being was at its top. Like Conrad said, we were connecting with them, speaking with them, having virtual coffee sessions. Everyone, throw your woes out, we're here for you. In the last few weeks, it's calmed down so much to the point that I think some of us are also ready to go back. There's no force, there's no push, there's no blame. But what we did do is open the school on Friday to allow teachers to come in and have a look at the setup, prepare themselves for what's to come on Monday, so that they don't feel like they're going to walk into no man's land, into a classroom that might not even be theirs, because we have to split them into different groups and different bubbles and in segregated areas. Well-being's always at the top. We're always there for them. We're always communicating. But from their point of view, because we've done a good job already, and some other schools have done so well, particularly with the United Learning Trust and some of the independent schools, we need to continue to deliver expectations to a good standard, because that's what's expected.
Right. Yeah, there's that interesting equity question, which we haven't really dug into, and maybe today isn't the day, but you just brought this up, right? Where things have worked, things will probably continue working, and where things haven't worked is probably where we need to invest the most resources and the most sort of intentionality and everything. And, the question is, how much will have been lost that we then need to regain, right? So it's a particular challenge. It's kind of loss upon loss, compounding. Okay, we've got some real logistical ones. Temperature checks. Do any of you do them? Will you do them? Are you doing them? No, Yael, no, Neelam, no, Conrad. Okay.
Jenny,
social distancing.
May I just pop in and say, unfortunately, Vaughn was not able to join us, but for early years provision, they are doing temperature checks, and we will find a way to feature those early years questions soon going forward. So that's all.
Yeah, so that's a very important point. Thank you so much, Lori. Yvonne Smiley couldn't be here. She's with Busy Bees, which is one of the biggest nursery networks in the world. It would have been great to hear her because she's been working. They've got provisions all over the world. So we will do another session with Yvonne focusing on early years, and they do temperature checks. But so it sounds like no one here. What about social distancing at lunchtime? Do you socially distance? Yeah.
The infirmary does temperature checks if a child is feeling unwell, and our stick in the mud was about 37.5 above, as representing a temperature, which is one of the symptoms. As soon as there's a symptom, then we have to follow that protocol. But we don't systematically do temperature checks on every individual. No.
Yeah, I think that was the question. So then the next two set of questions are around lunchtime and playtime. How are you managing outdoor play, and what kind of social distancing, physical distancing is existing at lunchtime? Yael, can I have you chime in on outdoor play maybe?
So what we do is each class group have its own time and its own zone in the yard, and the kids they have to keep the social distance in their breaks as well. As I said before, they reinvent games. We make sure that they will not miss a match. That will not cross each other when going up and down. I think we need to restructure the time schedule, but that works pretty fine. The problem is that the teachers doesn't have breaks. This is very challenging. So we're using all staff members to enable the teachers to have shorter breaks, and the learning day have been shortened to up to 5 hours at all, maximum.
That's helpful. And I know, Conrad, you had said that no, you don't have to do physical distancing under.
No, we
15.
don't. But we do everything we can to keep a cohort confined within that group itself. So your level moves around. It has its own designated space for lunch and for break. It's separate from the other students, unfortunately. But at least they're amongst themselves. That's for contact tracing. We have a number of stickers on the ground and signs that indicate entry and exit points, keeping on one side or the other of any given hallway. So all of that's in place. And then we've had to let some students out a little bit earlier than usual, just so that we have capacity to have them eat and enjoy their break time in such a way that there's really minimal chance of there being contact with other students. So we do what we can to enforce that, but we don't have to practice physical distancing between children of up to 15, which is obviously makes it much easier logistically.
Right.
This much said, if contact tracing needs to take place, what the cantonal doctor will want to know is if there's been prolonged physical proximity between the students that we know of over and above, sort of day-to-day activity, sitting opposite someone or next to someone. And so that's where it becomes a community effort, where the students, the parents, and everybody involved would have to give that information. Unfortunately, we haven't found ourselves in a case where...
That was going to be my next question. Have you had to do it yet? You haven't. Okay.
No.
Neelam, did you want to add anything on that? No. Okay. Lots of questions about whether parents are on board with, everyone sort of agrees with this premise of well-being before academics. Do parents agree? Yael, you're nodding.
Yes, I think in my school that's one of the main ideas or philosophy. And some parents just register their children because they live around. But when they were talking with other parents, and sharing the experience of having young children in school with a lot of stress, many hours of homework, etc., and teachers that are very strict about academic expectations versus emotional and social issues. So they more and more started to appreciate it. And I must say that it's not that we put them aside, but I think when I told my educators that I'm not expecting, it's not the first thing now. So, teachers want the students to achieve. And once you say, do it in your own time, so they came back to it. And one more thing, the children, they need to have the routines of studying. This is very important to say. So we did go back to the things, but as everybody said, we made it simpler. We didn't put it on the first step, and with the feedbacks we received from parents that most of kids were very, very happy to return back to school. And I think giving them the time to adjust was very important with that feeling of being put on the track again.
Neelam, I know that. Thank you very much, Yael. Neelam, I'm in the UK, so I'm very familiar with how much pressure there is here academically. Do you anticipate this being a problem with parents?
So we've actually provided town hall meetings, like online meetings.
Okay.
Voice all their concerns and send in all their questions beforehand. And as long as we've got really great heads here who have been able to answer those questions as honestly as they can, take into consideration all the sort of protection and safety protocols that we're going to take in our school. So we've had to, we've made it a point to listen to all the parents, answer all their questions. And you're right, there's some parents who are very worried, particularly because the risk is so much higher for some in particular categories. But I think if the parents trust you and the school and can see that you really are trying to do the best for the environment, as we've done so far in Ashford in our online environment as well, then they're willing to, work with us in this manner. There's no one to blame. We have to all coexist in this as it is. It's a situation that's been put on us. But I have to say we've got a really good response of attendance rate that's going to come back next week. We're looking at least 95% of students willing to return to school. So we must be doing something good, something right here in order to get that sort of feedback. And I think it's taking that really honest, bold approach, answering your questions. And, we're going to try to do this together, and we're going to do everything to the best of our ability and as safely as we can for the return of the students.
Thank you very much. So we've only got 3 minutes. I'd love to do a rapid fire question, and I have to rely on Conrad for the context of this quote, because I read a piece of yours before I started this, and I didn't leave it online. The Chinese symbol for crisis is not opportunity, and crisis. It's something else. It's you're at a point in the road, and are you going to change? You guys are all talking about pretty fundamental changes, real focus on well-being, a lot of communication with teachers, a lot of touch points for talking to teachers and being involved in their lives emotionally and obviously around students and academics. Does this continue, or is this a flash in the pan? Conrad? And feel free to fix my quote if I totally butchered it, which I probably did.
No, not at all. I mean, we've got to take the best out of this whole experience and use it next year. I'm actually doing a whole brainstorming session with faculty in groups online on Tuesday, and it's using these creative questions. What would happen if? What would change if? How could we do things differently? And there's a lot that's coming up. I think probably the most powerful experience for me has been to see how, this phrase, necessity is the mother of invention, how, because we cancelled the examinations for years 9, 10, and 11, we substituted them with deep understanding projects and with Viva Voces, 10-minute one-on-one check-ins. How successful those have been. And it really, I'm keen on us carrying some of that through next year. in lieu of examinations, at least for the younger students. The Vivas are
Oh, wow.
incredible. And I think
Okay,
they should
so
happen
big
online.
changes.
They don't need to happen in block.
All right, we're running out of time, so I'm going to go to Yael. Do things really change?
I think it's too early to tell. I think we don't have the perspective yet.
Yeah. Honest answer. Neelam, I know you're kind of at the beginning. Any thoughts as to how much changes here?
I think we're going to watch. We're going to have to wait and see what happens in the next few weeks and study the trends. But I think there's lots that's happened and lots that we can take into our environment moving forward.
Great. Well, I'd love to say a huge thank you to everyone, to Neelam, to Yael, to Conrad, to Lori, and to Katie for bringing us all together. I do agree that I think that this is an ongoing conversation. If you could see the questions in the panel, I mean, people have so many right now. This is such a challenge, so many different contexts in which schools are opening. And I think shared practice is very important and continuing the dialogue is very important. So I hope we can continue to do it. And thank you all for being with us. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Jenny. And yeah, please, I'd like to add my thanks also to Neelam, Yael, and Conrad. Thanks to our audience for your fabulous questions. The recording of this session will be available tomorrow, along with a summary of the major points from today, as we always provide. Yvonne Smiley, as we said, unfortunately was not able to join for technical reasons, but we've seen that you have lots of questions about early years, and we wanted to have her here because this is an important piece of the picture as well. So we'll make an arrangement to feature her and the work that they're doing as well. When this window closes for this session, you'll be directed to a survey. And the reason that that's important, and I'm bringing it up specifically, is because we're going to ask you some questions about real safely specifically and what more you would like to learn. We want to make sure that the conversation as we continue it is focused on the issues that are most pressing and most important to you. So please take a moment to fill that out if you can. And then you'll be directed to information about our next virtual session next week. We're delighted that next Wednesday, the 3rd of June, we'll be hosting a session on the topic of Save Our Education Budgets, Maintaining Expenditure on Education Post-Pandemic. That's featuring Rebecca Winthrop of the Brookings Institution as our moderator, and who will also provide some data and some background from the research that she's been doing. We'll also have Alice Albright, the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education, with us, Jamie Drummond, the co-founder of the One Foundation, and David Edwards, the General Secretary for Education International, joining that discussion about how we can recraft the education narrative to make sure that education remains front and center as we're making important decisions about funding going forward. As always, if you haven't already done so, please join the Learn It mailing list for details of this next event and more to come, and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And take care, keep well, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.